The Duke of Stanmore said it with the candle already lit, which meant that every man in the sale room at the East India House had to choose between hearing him and losing a lot. "No woman ever bid at the candle," he said, "and no woman ever will. The thing wants a head for figures and a tongue for tea, and Providence, in its economy, gave her neither." Rosamund Frayne did not turn round. She was standing at the end of the third bench, with her catalogue open on her palm and her pencil held short, the way her father had held one, listening to the clerk call the weights of a lot of common Congo lying in the warehouses at Crutched Friars. The candle on the rostrum had burned perhaps a sixth of its inch. She wrote in the margin what the lot went for. Then, beside it, she wrote what the tea was worth, which was not the same figure, and had not been the same figure in that room for 11 years. The Duke had a folded sheet of paper in the breast of his coat. So did every dealer on the benches, and the 2 brokers by the window, and the company's own clerk at the rostrum, who had one spread flat under the sale book, with the corners held down by an inkstand. It was a single printed leaf, put out on the Tuesday before every quarterly sale. It carried the number of every lot in the catalogue with a valuation set against it in a column of shillings and pence. The trade called it the sheet. Half the men in London who had ever drunk a cup of tea in their lives had paid for it out of a price that began on that leaf. Nobody in the room had ever asked whose hand set the figures in that column. They had asked once, 11 years before, and the answer had been Gideon Frayne, sworn broker of Mincing Lane, and the answer had satisfied them so completely that they never asked again. Gideon Frayne had been dead 2 years that March. It is worth understanding what a tea sale was, in the last years while the company still held the China trade whole in its 2 hands, because almost nothing about it worked the way a stranger would guess. 4 times in the year, in March and June and September and December, the company put up tea in its own sale room in Leadenhall Street. It did not sell to the public. It sold to a few score dealers who bought in bulk and sold on, most of it out along the roads to the shops of the country, where a man in Bideford or Kendal weighed 2 ounces into a paper and charged what he had to charge to live. Before each sale the company exposed musters. In the sample rooms above the warehouses, for 8 days together, small canisters stood in ranks with the lot numbers chalked on them, and any man entered in the company's book might come and handle the leaf and take a pinch away and make what he could of it. That was where the sale was truly decided, though hardly a shilling changed hands there. A lot might be 400 chests out of one ship, sound and even from end to end, or damp touched in the hold and gone flat through the middle of the parcel. And the difference between those 2 things was a fortune spread thin across a season. Then, on the day, the lots were put up in the order of the catalogue, at an upset price fixed beforehand by the company's committee of warehouses. The upset was the floor. A man might bid the upset, and he might bid above it, but no man might bid below it. And if nobody advanced upon the upset, the lot was withdrawn and carried on to the next quarter, and the company kept the tea and paid the warehouse rent and watched it grow 3 months older. The bidding went by inch of candle. A pin was set in the wax on the rostrum, and the clerk lit it, and while it burned the room might bid, and the last bid standing when the flame went down into the wick took the lot. The advances went by a penny in the pound of weight, and the clerk would take no less. 2 things happened afterwards that mattered more than anything that happened on the day. The first was the prompt. The buyer did not pay at the sale. He put down his name and his sureties, and the money fell due on a fixed day some 3 months after, which the trade called the prompt. And until that day came, he had the company's credit and the company's warehouses, and might do as he pleased with the tea. He could sell it on before he had paid a shilling for it. A whole trade had grown up inside that gap, and the men who understood the gap were rich, and the men who did not were clerks. The second was the duty, and the duty was the whole world. Tea did not pay the king on the day it came off the ship. It paid on the day it was cleared out of the company's warehouse for home use, and it paid according to the price it had fetched at the company's sale. Not by what the dealer afterwards got for it, not by weight, not by quality, not by the survey of any officer, by the price the room had called for it under the candle. There were 2 rates. Everything sold at 2 shillings and 6pence in the pound or under paid the lower duty, which stood at 60 and £5 upon every £100 of price. Everything sold above 2 shillings and 6pence paid the higher, which stood at 90 and 6. That deserves reading twice, because a great many men in the trade never read it once. The line was not drawn at what the tea was. It was drawn at what somebody had said in a room. A parcel of ordinary black Congo, the same leaf out of the same chest, could stand on the cheap side of the line, or the dear side of it, and the thing that put it on one side or the other was a single penny in the bidding. Rosamund Frayne had known that since she was 15 years old, because her father had made her copy the schedule twice into a fair hand as a punishment for something she could no longer remember. The March sale went as the March sales had gone all her life. The greens were put up first, and the fine hyson made a good price, because there were 4 houses that wanted it, and no arrangement between them. Then the black teas came on, lot after lot of Congo, and something in the room went quiet and civil and dead. A lot was called. The upset was 2 shillings and 3pence. Mr. Silas Cattermole of Cattermole and Row of Fenchurch Street lifted 1 finger. The candle burned. Nobody advanced. Mr. Cattermole had the lot. At the upset, another lot was called, a better tea by any tongue in England, and the upset was 2 shillings and 3pence again, because the sheet had valued it at 2 and 3. Mr. Dunnage lifted a finger. Nobody advanced. Mr. Dunnage had it. So it went through the whole afternoon, 44 lots of black tea, and not one of them advanced by a single penny, and every one of them going to one of 9 houses, and every one of them staying on the near side of 2 shillings and 6pence, where the duty was 60 and 5 and not 90 and 6. It looked like a slow day. It was not a slow day. It was the most disciplined thing in the city of London, and it had a name, though nobody said the name aloud in Leadenhall Street. The trade called it standing off. 9 houses had settled beforehand what each should take and at what price, and having settled it, they simply did not bid against one another, and the company's floor became the company's ceiling. Afterwards, in a back room at a coffee house, they held the real sale among themselves, and the lots were knocked out again between the 9 of them at something nearer what the tea was worth, and the difference between the 2 afternoons was divided as a dividend among men who had risked nothing, and carried nothing, and done no work of any kind. The company lost by it, the revenue lost by it twice over, the duty being reckoned upon a price held down on purpose. The country grocer lost by it, because he could not buy in Leadenhall Street himself, and had to take his tea from whichever of the 9 houses had drawn his portion of England. The only people who did not lose by it were the 9 houses, and the men who lent the 9 houses money. The Duke of Stanmore lent them money. He had advanced Catamole and Row 20 and £2,000 upon the security of the company's own warrants for the tea lying in the warehouses at 5 in the 100, and he thought of it, when he thought of it at all, as the safest thing he owned. Because there was tea behind it, and tea was as good as bullion. And everybody knew that. He came to the sales twice a year, to be seen, and to stand at the back with his gloves in one hand, and to be asked his opinion of the market by men who already knew it. When the last lot was gone, Rosamund Frayne closed her catalogue and walked out past him, and he moved his shoulder half an inch to let her by, in the manner of a man making room for a servant with a tray. The office of Gideon Frayne and Son stood in Mincing Lane above a cooper's, 3 rooms and a landing, with a window that faced north, because north light does not lie about the colour of an infusion. There was no sun. There had been one, briefly, and he was buried at St. Dunstan's beside his mother, and Gideon Frayne had been too superstitious or too tired ever to have the door painted over. So the son was a daughter, and the daughter had grown up in the north room among the tasting bowls. A tea broker did not buy tea and did not sell it. He tasted it and he valued it, and men paid him for the valuation. 4 brokers were sworn to the trade in Rosamund's father's time, and their work began in the sample rooms above the warehouses, and it ended in the printed sheet. The work itself was nothing like the mystery the dealers pretended. It was a set of small, exact physical habits repeated 10,000 times, until they became a second memory in the hands. You rubbed the dry leaf hard in the palm to wake the smell out of it. You looked at the make of the leaf, whether it was well twisted or broken and dusty. You weighed the same quantity every time, always the same, because a valuation is a comparison, and a comparison is nothing if the quantities move. You poured the water off the boil and counted the same count, and you looked at the leaf again wet, and opened out. Because the wet leaf tells you what was done to it in China, and the dry leaf only tells you what was done to it since. Then you drank it off the spoon with a noise like a badly mended pump, and you spat and you wrote a figure. The figure was the whole art, and the art was not taste. Any child can tell a good cup from a bad one. The art was to say what 140 chests of an indifferent middling black tea, 3 parts sound and 1 part faintly touched with damp, would be worth in Leadenhall Street on a Thursday in June, given what else was in the catalogue, what the last quarter had made, and how much of the same ship's tea the trade already had in hand. A valuation was an opinion about a market, dressed as an opinion about a leaf. Rosamund had been doing it since she was 11. Her father, who was not a sentimental man, had begun by using her the way a joiner uses a bench hook, because a child's palate is clean, and a child will not lie to please a customer she has never met. By the time she was 19, she was tasting the whole catalogue with him, lot for lot, and they compared their figures at the end of each day, and by the time she was 22 her figures were the ones that went to the printer, and he sat with his hands on his knees and let them go. For the last 4 years of his life, the sheet was hers. For the 2 years since his death, every quarter, it had still been hers. The old clerk, Ephraim Dowd, carried the copy to the printer in Bucklersbury, as he had carried it for 30 years, and the printer set it up as he had always set it up, under the standing heading that gave the name of the house, and nobody in the trade had ever thought to wonder about it, because the sheet had always come, and things that always come are not thought about at all. She had considered more than once putting her own name at the head of it, and had not, and knew exactly why she had not, and did not like the reason. What she had instead of a name was the books. Gideon Frayne had kept his sale books since the year the French cut off the king's head. There was a book for every year, quarto, bound in sheep, and in each book every lot of every sale was entered in a ruled column, with the ship, the sort, the number of chests, the weight, the upset price, the sheet valuation, the price it actually made under the candle, and the buyer's name. 11 years of them stood on the shelf in the north room in a row that Rosamund had dusted every Saturday since she was a child. In the January after her father died, with the office quiet and Dowd asleep in his chair by the fire, she took down the 11 years and did a thing nobody had done, which was to read them sideways. Anybody in the trade could tell you the ring existed. It was not a secret. It was more like weather. But nobody had ever laid the 11 years flat on a table and asked the books 3 questions in a row. The first question was how often a black tea lot advanced above its upset. In the year her father began the sheet, better than half of them advanced. 2 years later, a third. In the last 4 years, not one lot in 20, and never in the sorts that mattered. The second question was who took them. 9 houses, always the same 9, each of them taking year after year, within a few chests, the same share of the whole. Men do not fall by accident into shares that steady. Sailors do not row in time by coincidence. The third question was the one that took her the rest of the winter, because it could not be answered out of the sale books at all. She wrote to 11 country grocers who had dealt with her father, and asked each of them, as a favor to a dead man, what he had been charged for common Congo in each of the last 4 Octobers, and out of what house he had it. Then she set their answers beside the sale books. The tea that left Leadenhall Street at 2 shillings and 3 pence was charged to the grocer at Bristol 3 weeks later at 3 shillings and 6 pence in the pound, before ever the duty was reckoned upon it. Some of that was carriage, and some of it was honest profit, and some of it was the ordinary waste of a trade that runs on credit. And the rest of it, when she had allowed for everything she could think of to allow for, and then allowed a little more to be safe, came to a shilling in the pound of weight, taken out of the middle by men who had never so much as looked into a chest. She reckoned what that shilling amounted to across the black teas of 1 year, and then she sat for a while with her hands flat on the table on either side of the paper, and did not move. It came to more than the whole revenue of the county she had been born in. Job Kinnersley of Bristol wrote to her in February. He had dealt with her father for 19 years. He was a grocer with 2 shops and a warehouse and a barge on the river, and he wrote the way such men wrote, in a big upright hand with the lines running downhill. He wrote that Cattermole and Roe had raised him again at Christmas, and that he had asked why, and had been told the market. He wrote that he had gone to 2 other houses, and one had told him he was Cattermole's man and would not deal with him, in those words, without shame. And the other had offered him the same price to the halfpenny. He wrote that if the price went up again in the summer, he would have to shorten his weights or lose his shop, and that his father had begun with a barrow. Then he wrote the sentence that Rosamund Frayne carried about with her for the next 6 months like a stone in her shoe. "I have got no quarrel with a man taking his profit," he wrote. "What I cannot get over is that they will not let me into the room. That was the whole thing, not the price. The room. Any man might be entered in the company's book as a buyer, provided he could satisfy the company on 2 points. He had to be a person of substance, and he had to find sureties, because the company sold on the prompt and did not care to chase its money round England. And he had to be able to take a lot. That was the part nobody talked about. And it was the part that did all the work. The company put its black teas up in lots of 300 and 400 chests, because it suited the warehouses and it suited the sale room, and it had always been done so. A grocer in Bristol with 2 shops wanted 11 chests. He could not buy 11 chests in Leadenhall Street any more than a man wanting a pint of ale could buy it at the brewery gate. So he bought from Cattermole, and Cattermole bought at the upset with nobody bidding against him, and the shilling in the pound went into the middle of the trade and stayed there. The lot size was the wall, the sureties were the gate in the wall, and the 9 houses had not built either of them, which was the beautiful part. From their side, they had simply noticed that the company had built them and moved in. Rosamund read Kinnersley's letter twice, and then she went and stood at the north window with her arms folded, looking down into Mincing Lane, where 2 men were rolling a cask along the gutter, and she began, without any drama about it at all, to take the wall apart in her head. The thing she saw, standing at that window, was that the wall was made of 2 bricks, and both of them could be picked out with a pen. The lot was too big for one grocer. Very well, it was not too big for 40 grocers. A lot of 600 chests, divided among 45 houses, came to 13 chests apiece, which was exactly what such a house wanted, and exactly what such a house could sell before the leaf went stale. Nothing in the company's rules said that a lot must be bought by one man's money. The company sold the lot. What happened to the chests afterwards was no business of Leadenhall Street. The sureties were the other brick, and the sureties looked worse than they were. The company wanted to be certain of its money on the prompt day. It had been in the habit of getting that certainty from one great name in the city, because one great name is convenient and can be found in an hour. But 45 country grocers, each with a banker in his own town who had known him and his father, could produce 45 small certainties. And 45 small certainties added together are a larger and steadier thing than one large one, as any underwriter in the kingdom could have told them, and as none of them had troubled to think. And then there was the prompt itself, which she turned over in her hands for 2 days like a key found in a drawer. A grocer buying in June did not pay until September. What was he doing in July and August? He was selling tea. He was selling the very tea he had bought and had not paid for, 2 ounces at a time, over his own counter at his own price, for ready money, 6 days in the week. By the time the prompt fell due, A well-run shop had passed the greater part of the parcel across its scales, and the money was in the till. The company's own credit, which the 9 houses had used for a generation to make themselves rich, would finance the country trade exactly as well. And the country trade had never once been told so. There was one hole in it, and she found the hole herself before anybody could hand it to her. Duty was payable on clearance, not at the prompt, and duty was the largest single sum in the whole business, adding near 2/3 again to the price of the tea. A man could not sell what he had not cleared, and could not clear what he could not pay duty upon. She solved that in a morning with a pencil. They would not clear the parcel at once. They would clear it in portions as it was wanted, 13 chests being nothing at all to move, the duty on the first portion out of each man's own till, and the duty on every portion after out of the money the first portion had made. Where a man could not find even that, the delivery orders themselves were good security, and she sat in a discount house in Lothbury for an hour and a half, and came out with a rate in writing. The 9 houses were not shippers, or planters, or manufacturers of anything. They were men who stood in a doorway and charged rent to everybody who wished to walk through it. Take the doorway away and there was nothing behind them but a coffee house and an arrangement. In March, after the sale, she began to travel. It cost her 41 days and rather more money than she had, and it was done in stagecoaches and in parlours and back rooms behind shops that smelled of currants and soap and burnt sugar. Bristol first because of Kinnersley, then Bath, Exeter, Worcester, Birmingham, Nottingham, Sheffield, Leeds, York, Hull, Norwich, Ipswich. She sat down with grocers and their wives, and she did not make speeches, because she had watched her father sell valuations for 20 years, and knew that the way to sell a hard thing is to make the other man do the arithmetic himself. She would put a sheet of paper on the counter and set down what he paid for common congu in October. Then she set down beside it, out of her own books, what that identical tea had made under the candle in Leadenhall Street. Then she would put the pencil down and go and look at the shop while he did the subtraction. Most of them did the subtraction twice. Some would not come in. A dozen were afraid of Catamol and said so honestly, and she did not press them. 4 told her a woman could not do it, and one of those 4 was a woman. But 45 houses signed the articles, from Truro to Berwick, and Anne Thirlby of Norwich, who had run her late husband's shop for 11 years, and was the hardest bargainer Rosamund met on the whole road, signed for 400 chests a year, and made the others sign in her parlour, where she could watch them do it. The articles were 3 pages. Each house bound itself for its own portion, and no more. The tea was to be bought jointly and divided by weight, the parcels drawn by lot, so that nobody could say he had been served the sweepings. The buying was to be done by Rosamund Frayne, who would be paid 1 halfpenny in the pound of weight for tasting, valuing, buying, dividing, and shipping, and not a farthing besides, and who was to have no interest whatever in the price. If she bought badly, they could turn her out at a quarter's notice. That last clause was her own, and Kinnersley argued with her about it for an hour, and she would not move. In April she carried the articles to Leadenhall Street and asked to have the association entered in the company's book of buyers. Mr. Sowerby, in the office of the Committee of Warehouses, was a decent man with a cold, and he read the articles twice and looked up unhappily. "It cannot be done, ma'am." "Which part cannot?" "Any of it." Buyers are entered in the name of a house. A house is a man. Where is that written?" He opened his mouth and shut it, and went and fetched the bylaws, which was, as she said afterwards, more than most men would have done. They read them together at the counter for the better part of an hour. The buyer must be a person of substance approved by the committee, must find security to the committee's satisfaction, and must attend or send his known agent. The word was person. It was person in 11 places out of 11, and it was not man anywhere, because the men who drafted it had never supposed the distinction would be needed, and had never taken the trouble to make it. "There is a custom," said Mr. Sowerby. "There is," she agreed. "Custom is not a bylaw. Custom is only what has happened up to now." He put the articles in the box for the committee, and wrote her a receipt, and blew his nose, and said that the committee sat on the 9th, and he would say nothing to anybody, and he kept his word, and it made no difference at all, because Cattermole had been told within the day. 3 mornings later, a footman brought a note to Mincing Lane, and in the afternoon Rosamund Frayne was shown up into a room in Grosvenor Square, where the Duke of Stanmore stood with his back to a very fine fire and did not ask her to sit. He was not a stupid man, which she had rather hoped he would be. He was 33, and he had the sort of face that has been agreed with for so long that it has stopped expecting anything else. "Miss Frayne, I am told you propose to bring a mob of shopkeepers into the company's sale room. 45 of them, sir, and not all at once, and to bid yourself. At the candle, in front of the trade. Under the candle would be more usual. I shall be sitting down." He did not smile. "I have an interest in the tea trade, and I do not choose to see it disturbed by a piece of theatre. So let us be plain and save the afternoon. You want money. I will do better than money. There is a vacancy coming among the sworn brokers, and I can put a name into it, and a name may be Frayne as easily as anything else. 200 a year, and your father's house continued, and no more of this. And in return, you withdraw the articles and go home." Rosamund stood with her gloves in her hand and looked at the fire for a moment, because it was a very good fire, and she had walked from Mincing Lane. "You have paid me a compliment, sir," she said, "and I do not think you meant to. You have offered 200 a year to a person who cannot possibly do the thing she says she can do. Nobody buys off an impossibility." The Duke's colour came up, exactly 1 shade. "You mistake me. It is not that you would be dangerous. It is that you would be crushed, publicly and in one afternoon, and I have a distaste for watching that sort of thing. The trade is a machine, madam. It has been running since before your father was born. You have brought a needle to it." "That is quite right," she said. "It is a machine, and a machine has a place in it where if you put a needle, the whole thing stops. Good afternoon, Your Grace." The Committee of Warehouses sat on the 9th of April and did not decide. They did not refuse her, which Cattermole had expected, and they did not admit her, which she had hoped for. They ordered the articles to lie on the table, directed that the question be taken up again on the eve of the June sale, and appointed nobody to look into anything meanwhile, which is what committees do when they wish a thing would go away by itself. Mr. Cattermole helped it along. He was a heavy, courteous, soft-spoken man of 60, who had never raised his voice in his life, and had never needed to. He did not attack the plan. He was far too able for that. He wrote to the committee that no man living respected the late Gideon Frayne more than he did, and that it was for that very reason he begged the gentleman to consider whether the Frayne name ought to be put forward in a matter of this kind, and whether the committee had wholly satisfied itself as to how the valuations of the last dozen years had been arrived at. It was beautifully done. It accused nobody of anything. It simply set a small, cold draught blowing through a room and left it to blow. Then he began upon the sureties. 2 country bankers were written to by London houses with whom they kept accounts, and both withdrew in the same week in the same embarrassed language. Anne Thirlby heard of it before Rosamund did, replaced them out of Norwich in 4 days, and wrote underneath the names in her upright hand, "Let him try that again, and I will tell the reason in the marketplace." And on the last Friday in April, Ephraim Dowd came up the stairs into the north room and stood with his hat in both hands and said that he had been going to take a thing to his grave and found that he could not. He had been Gideon Frayne's clerk for 30 years. He was 71, and he had a cough that shook the window frames. He went to the shelf where the sale books stood, and he did not take one down. He took hold of the shelf itself and lifted it off its brackets, and out of the shallow space behind it he brought a slim book in marbled boards that Rosamund Frayne had dusted round for the whole of her adult life, without ever once knowing it was there. He wrote it every quarter, Dowd said. He never let me copy it. But I carried it to the printers when the other was too heavy for him, and I am not a fool, miss, and I have known for 26 years. It was ruled in 4 columns, in her father's small upright hand, and each page carried a quarter's sale. The first column was the lot number. The second was headed true, and it held a valuation. The third was headed printed, and it held a different valuation, always lower, never by very much, never by so much that anybody would exclaim, but always in the same direction and always in the sorts where the country trade bought. The fourth column had no heading at all. It held initials and sums. C and R, 60 guineas. D, 20 guineas. H and B, 20 guineas. Quarter after quarter, year after year, back and back through the sheep-bound spine, to a first entry in the November of the year her uncle failed, where the sum was £1,100 and the entry read, in a hand that was steady even there, to be worked out. He had never worked it out. The debt had been discharged inside 3 years, and he had gone on for another 9. Rosamund read it standing up, and then sat down on the floor beside the fire, with the book on her knees, which she had not done since she was a girl, and read the whole of it through again from the first page. The Committee of Warehouses fixed its upset prices with the broker's sheet open on the table. That was the point of the sheet. That was the reason 4 men were sworn to the trade at all. The floor of every sale in Leadenhall Street, for 11 years, had been set, quarter by quarter, an inch too low, by a man who was paid 60 guineas a time to hold the pen at that angle, and the 9 houses had not needed to cheat the auction at all. Because the auction had been arranged before it began in a north room in Mincing Lane by her father. Then she came to the last 4 years and found the thing that stopped her breath. For the last 4 years of his life, the valuations had been hers. She had tasted the catalogue, and made the figures, and written the fair copy for the printer with her own hand, and been proud of it, and been paid nothing for it, and thought it the best work in London. In the marbled book, against 6 and 8 lots in each of those quarters, her father had entered her figure in the column headed true, and a lower figure in the column headed printed, and a sum in the 4th column. He had been altering her fair copy on the way to the press. She remembered, with a completeness that was almost cruel, sitting at that table in her 23rd year and finding two numbers on the printed sheet that were not the numbers she had sent, and going to him about it and being told kindly over his spectacles that he had corrected a little for the market, and that she would understand the market when she had lived in it longer. She had believed him. She had gone on believing him for 4 years, and for 2 more after he was dead. There was a great deal she might have done with that night. What she in fact did was to get up off the floor at about 11 o'clock, light 2 more candles, take down every sale book from the shelf, and begin to make a table. Dowd fell asleep in his chair. She worked until the milk carts. By 7 in the morning she had it. 11 years of sales. And against every altered lot, the true valuation, the printed valuation, the upset the committee had fixed, the price the lot had actually made under the candle, the buyer, and the sum entered in the 4th column. Then she totted what the difference in the upsets had come to over the whole 11 years. And beside it, because she was her father's daughter and could not stop her hand, what the revenue had lost by having its duty reckoned upon the smaller number. The first figure was a fortune. The second was a great deal larger than the first, and it belonged to the king. That was the moment, she said long afterwards, at which she stopped being angry. Silas Cattermole came to Mincing Lane himself on the Tuesday, which was an honour, and sat down without being asked, which was not. "I knew your father 35 years," he said. "There is not a kinder thing I can do for his memory than what I have come to do." "Then do it. Withdraw the articles. Take the brokerage his grace has offered you, or take mine. Which is better? Let the June sale go by as sales go by. And there is a book in this room that no living soul need ever hear of. And your father goes on being what the trade thinks he was. And if I do not, then it comes out," he said, "and I shall be very sorry, and I shall not be able to help it, because the committee will have asked me a direct question, and I am not a man who lies to the committee." He turned his hat round once on his knee. "And you will forgive me, Miss Frayne, but you must see how it will look. 4 of those years the fair copy was in your hand. The trade will not sit down and work out which of the 2 of you held the pen. They will say Frayne, and they will mean both of you, and every grocer from Truro to Berwick who has signed your articles will read it in the newspapers inside a week." He was quite right about all of it. That was the difficulty. He was a clever man saying true things, and the truest thing he said was the last one. And it was the only one that touched her, because 45 houses had put their names to a paper on the strength of a name that was about to be worth nothing at all. She gave Silas Cattermole no answer at all. She said that she would think of it, and showed him down the stairs herself, and stood in the doorway until his back had turned the corner into Fenchurch Street. Then she went upstairs and wrote 45 letters. Dowd wanted to know why she did not write one and have it copied. She said because 45 men had signed a paper on her word and were entitled to hear it from her own hand, and she sat at the north window from noon until past midnight, and wrote them all, and every letter said the same 4 things, in the same order, that her father had for 11 years been paid by the buying houses to write down the value of the company's tea, that the printed sheet had therefore been false, and the company's upset prices with it, that for 4 of those years the valuations had been hers and had been altered after they left her hand, and that she could prove it in her father's own writing. but that no man was obliged to believe her, and that she was carrying the whole of it to the Committee of Warehouses on the 9th of May, before anybody could carry it for her, and that any house wishing to withdraw might do so by return of post with her respect and no ill will whatever. 4. Withdrew. Kinnersley of Bristol wrote back a single line. "You have told me a thing that could have hanged your business, and you told it to me first, and I will hear no more about it." Anne Thirlby of Norwich wrote back 3 pages, of which the last 2 were about the price of loaf sugar. On the 9th of May, Rosamund Frayne stood at the end of a long table in a room over the sale room in Leadenhall Street, with 11 gentlemen of the Committee of Warehouses down one side of it, and put the marbled book on the cloth, and turned it round, so that the writing faced the chairman. She did not make a speech about her father. She had decided on the coach that no good would come of trying to explain a man to a room, and it turned out to be the correct decision, because the room did not want him explained. It wanted the columns. She took them through it lot by lot for 2 hours and 20 minutes. True, printed, upset, price made, buyer, and the sum paid, quarter by quarter, back 11 years. She had brought her table fare copied in 3 sheets, and 11 sale books in a porter's basket to be examined against it, and she invited them at the beginning to send out for any dealer's own books they pleased, since it takes 2 to keep an account like the 4th column, and the other party had kept his too. When she had done, Mr. Absalom Grierson, who was in the chair, sat back and asked the only question that mattered to him. "Miss Frayne, what do you want?" "3 things, sir, and none of them for myself." She had them written out. First, that the association be entered in the Book of Buyers, on the sureties already lodged, which the committee's own bylaws did not forbid and never had. Second, that 1/3 of the black tea declared for the June sale be put up in lots of 60 chests instead of 600, so that a house in the country might buy what a house in the country could actually sell. Third, that the upset prices for the June sale be fixed, not from the printed sheet, but from the column, headed true. That last one made the table stir, because it was the only one that cost anybody anything, and the man it cost was in the room. "You are asking us to raise our own floor," said Grierson. "You will be bidding at it." "I shall be paying it, sir, on every chest my houses take." "I am asking you to fix the floor where the tea is honestly worth, because it has stood below that for 11 years, and the company has lost by it, and the revenue has lost more." Then she told them what they were really deciding, which is a thing very few people have the nerve to do to 11 men who outrank them. Gentlemen, the company's charter is before Parliament this session. There are committees sitting at this moment taking evidence upon whether your sales get a fair price for the country. This book will be read by somebody. You may have it now, from me in April, with a remedy attached to it, that you may say you thought of yourselves. Or you may have it in July, from a select committee, with no remedy attached to it at all, and be asked across a table why your upset prices were fixed for 11 years out of a broker sheet you never once tested. There was a silence of perhaps 8 seconds, which in a room like that is an age. They gave her all 3, and they took something back, which she had known they would. The house of Gideon Frayne and Son was struck off the company's list of sworn brokers that afternoon, and the sheet was not to go out under that name again. She had expected it, had written it into her own list of what she was prepared to lose, and she signed the minute without any alteration of her face at all. Dowd cried in the passage afterwards, and she stood with her hand on his shoulder and let him. She asked for one thing more before she left the room, and got it because Grierson was ashamed and wanted to give her something. She asked that the sheet, in future, be published over the name of the person who actually made the valuations. The musters for the June sale were exposed on the 28th of May, and Rosamund Frayne was in the sample rooms above Crutched Friars every day of the 8, from the hour they opened. She tasted the whole catalogue, 209 lots, and where a lot was drawn from more than one parcel of chests, she made them fetch her a muster from each, and where the warehouse keeper grumbled, she waited him out. She was looking for two things. The first was the sound middling Congo the country trade could sell all winter, and she found it, most of it, in one ship's teas. The second was what everybody else in the room believed she was looking for. So she made certain they believed something. For 8 days she stood a long while at the green teas, and had the fine hyson canisters fetched down twice, and asked Mr. Sowerby, not quietly, what the committee had put as the upsets on the hyson lots. She left her catalogue face up on the bench when she went to wash her mouth out. The green lots ticked in pencil, with a little sum in the margin beside them, and came back and found it moved 1.5 inches from where she had put it down. She wrote to a fashionable grocer in Piccadilly, a man she knew for a talker, asking whether he could take fine hyson in quantity in the summer, and let his answer lie on her table. By the 1st of June, it was all round Fenchurch Street that the Frayne woman meant to go for the greens, because the greens were where the money was, and a woman would naturally chase the fashionable article. Cattermole believed it. It was an easy thing for him to believe, which is the whole art of the business. On the 4th of June, 4 days before the sale, she wrote to the Duke of Stanmore. It was the hardest letter she ever wrote, because it had to be got right for a man who would not want to read it, and because she had nothing to gain by writing it at all. She set it out for him in plain language and in order, that he held the company's warrants for tea as security for £20,000 and £2,000, that a warrant is worth the tea, and the tea is worth what it will fetch less what stands against it, and what stands against it is the duty. That the duty is charged upon the sale price, and the schedule breaks at 2 shillings and 6pence, 60 and 5 below it, 90 and 6 above. That upon a congu standing at 2 and 6pence, tea and duty together came to 4 shillings and a penny halfpenny in the pound of weight, and that upon the very same tea at 2 and 7pence, they came to 5 shillings and 3 farthings, so that the single penny of advance cost 11pence, and a farthing in every pound, which upon a chest of 80 pounds was 3 pounds 15 shillings, and upon a lot of 600 chests was 2,250 pounds, that the ordinary escape from a dear purchase was to ship it abroad and take the drawback of the duty, and that this year there was no abroad. The American ports were shut by the war, and the northern ports by the Emperor's decrees, and the licenses that went round them were not to be had that season at any price, and that the committee had this quarter fixed the upsets for the middling black teas at 2 shillings and 5pence. She did not tell him what she meant to do. She had no obligation to make him a present of that, and she did not. She told him where the edge was, and that men who did not know where it was were going to walk about very freely on the 8th of June, and that his security would be standing on the tee when they did it. His Grace's reply came the next afternoon, and consisted of 2 lines in a secretary's hand, thanking Miss Frayne for her communication, and observing that His Grace's affairs were in the hands of men of business, who had been in the trade a great many years. The sale-room was full an hour before it opened on the 8th of June, and men who had not attended a tea sale in 4 years came and stood along the back wall with their hats on. Rosamund Frayne sat at the end of the 3rd bench with her catalogue open on her palm and her pencil held short. Job Kinnersley sat on her left with his hands on his knees like a man in church. Anne Thirlby sat behind her with a list of the 45 houses and the chests each had subscribed for, and a black lead pencil of her own, and no expression whatever. The Greens went up first. She bid for the Hyson, steadily and without hurry. The room came alive at the second lot. Mr. Dunnage advanced upon her, and she advanced upon him, and Cattermole's second man came in over the pair of them, and the price went up past anything the green teas had made since the peace. She took one small lot of the finest at a price that made the benches murmur, let 3 large ones go, and bid for the 4th until the candle was down to a thread, and then folded her hands. Cattermole and Roe had the 3 biggest parcels of fine hyson in the catalogue at 4 shillings and 9pence in the pound, and Silas Cattermole allowed himself, for the first time that day, to look along the bench at her. She was writing in her margin, and did not look up. Then the black teas came on, and the first of the small lots was called 60 chests of sound middling Congo, upset 2 shillings and 5pence. Rosamund Frayne said 2 and 6. The clerk repeated it. The candle burned. Mr. Dunnage said 2 and 7, and had the lot. The second small lot was called upset 2 and 5. Rosamund said 2 and 6. Mr. Dunnage said 2 and 7, and had it. The third went the same way, and the 4th, and the 5th. By the 8th, Kinnersley's hands had begun to work against one another, and behind her Anne Thirlby had stopped writing. By the 11th, the benches were enjoying themselves. Because the whole room could see the shape of it, the Frayne woman came in at the upset and 1 penny, and was walked over, every time, by men who had been buying tea since before she was born. Rosamund bid 2 and 6 on the 12th lot and lost it, and made a small mark in her catalogue, and turned the page. She was not bidding for tea. She had not been bidding for tea since the 4th lot. She was bidding for the line. The upset was 2 and 5pence. Nobody could take a lot from her at 2 and 6, except by advancing to 2 and 7, because the clerk would take no advance but a penny. And 2 shillings and 7pence was 1 penny over the place where the duty schedule broke its back. Every lot they took from her that afternoon left the cheap side of the line, and landed on the dear side, and jumped from 60 and 5 pounds in the 100 to 90 and 6, and the men taking them would not see the bill until the day they cleared the tea out of the warehouse to sell it. 11pence and a farthing in every pound of weight. 3 pounds 15 shillings on every chest. On 60 chests, 225 pounds, and Mr. Dunnage had said the word 12 times before anybody in his interest thought to ask what the word cost. The man who thought to ask was Cattermole, and he thought of it at the 16th lot. She knew the exact moment, because she was watching the shine on the top of his head and not the rostrum. He stopped. He looked down at his catalogue for longer than a man looks at a catalogue he has already marked. Then he sent his clerk out of the room, and the clerk came back within 4 minutes and bent down and said something, and Silas Cattermole sat back on the bench with his hands on his knees and did not move again for a quarter of an hour. The 17th lot was called. Rosamund said 2 and 6. Mr. Dunnage, who had been told nothing and understood less, said 2 and 7. The 18th, 2 and 6, 2 and 7. At the 19th, Cattermole put his hand on Dunnage's sleeve. The clerk called for advances. Nobody advanced. The candle burned down and went out, and the lot was knocked to Miss Rosamund Frayne, buying for the association, at 2 shillings and 6pence in the pound, on the cheap side of the line. That was the moment the ring died, and it did not die of her. It died because Silas Cattermole put his hand on a man's arm in a public room and gave no reason. Dunnage sat and looked at him. 2 benches along, Mr. Hoyle looked at both of them. An arrangement between 9 houses is not a contract and cannot be sued upon. It is held together entirely by every man's belief that the others are still in it. Cattermole had just stood off from standing off in front of everybody, with no explanation he could give aloud, since the explanation was the duty schedule. And to say the duty schedule out loud was to tell the whole trade what it had walked into. So he said nothing, and the 9 houses came apart on the benches over the next 2 hours like a rope going in a fire. Dunnage bid on out of temper. Hoyle and Barbank bid to punish Dunnage. 2 of the smaller houses, which had for years taken what they were given, began quietly buying the tea they actually wanted at prices they had never been allowed to pay. And through the whole of it Rosamund Frayne said 2 and 6, and stopped, and said it again on the next lot, and stopped, without once raising her voice or her price. The sale ran until past 6. When the last candle went out, the association had 2,340 chests of sound middling Congo at 2 shillings and 6pence in the pound, which was every chest it had subscribed for, and 140 over, and not one chest of it on the wrong side of the duty. The 9 houses had 11,000 chests of black tea above the line, 3 great parcels of fine hyson at 4 and 9pence, and a prompt falling due on the 11th of September. Anne Thirlby put her pencil away and said, well, the summer was the quietest part of the whole story, and the part that did all the killing. The association cleared its tea in portions through July, 13 chests at a time, paid its duty at 60 and 5, shipped by road and river to Truro and Berwick and everywhere between, and sold it over the counter through the harvest at the ordinary price. Nobody in England noticed anything at all, except that in 45 towns the tea did not go up that year. The 9 houses tried to sell theirs, and could not, for a reason no amount of experience could argue with. Their tea and its duty together stood them at 5 shillings and 3 farthings in the pound of weight. The same leaf in the association's hands had cost 4 shillings and a penny halfpenny. No grocer in the kingdom would pay 11pence in the pound more for a common black tea when the shop across the street had the identical article, and no wholesale house on earth can sell above the price at which its own customers may buy directly. They went to the drawback and found what she had told the Duke of Stanmore they would find. There was no abroad that summer. They went to the warehouse and waited, and paid rent, and the tea sat in the dark getting older, because black tea does not improve in a London warehouse, and everybody in the trade knows it. Then it was the 11th of September, and the company wanted its money. Cattermole and Roe could not find it. Neither could Dunwich. Two of the smaller houses paid and survived, and were quietly glad of it. The company did what the company had always done with a defaulting buyer, which was written into the conditions of sale, and had been written there for 50 years. It put the tea up again, at the defaulter's risk, and charged him the difference between what he had promised and what it fetched, together with the rent and the charges. It fetched what such tea fetches, when every man in the room knows exactly what stands against it, and exactly who has to sell. Cattermole and Roe stopped payment on the 22nd of September. The house had stood since the year of the commutation, and it was gone in a morning, and the notice went up in Fenchurch Street. The Duke of Stanmore came to Mincing Lane on the 24th, in a plain coat, without a servant, and climbed the stairs above the coopers, and stood in the doorway of the north room where the light was. "You wrote to me," he said. "I did. I did not read it. My man of business read it, and gave me the sense of it. And the sense he gave me was that a broker's daughter with a grievance was frightening herself with the excise tables. I have read it since. Twice he turned his hat over once. Did you know when you wrote it what would happen on the 8th of June? I knew what I intended to do. I did not know they would take it. They might have let me have the tea at the line, which would have suited me nearly as well, and cost them nothing at all. You did not tell me you meant to bid to the line and stop. No, you are not my partner, sir, and I had no duty to show you my hand of cards. I told you where the edge of the floor was, in writing, 4 days before the dancing began. That is the most one person of business can honestly do for another, and rather more than any man in this trade has ever done for me." He stood for a moment. "They are calling on my warrants," he said. "I hold paper for 20 and £2,000 against 11,000 chests of tea that nobody in England will buy. I know what you hold. I valued it on the 4th of June. Then value it now." She did, out loud, standing at the north window, with her arms folded, and it took her 4 minutes. The tea was sound. There was nothing whatever wrong with the leaf. The whole of the injury was the duty standing against it, and duty cannot be argued out of a chest. Sold wholesale, it was worth a little over half what he had lent against it. Sold to a house that owned the counter it would be retailed over, it was worth a great deal more. Because a dear parcel run through a cheap one at a shilling in the 20 makes a blend a shop can sell all winter at the usual price, without one customer ever knowing there had been a sale in June. "There are 45 shops in my association," she said, "and they have counters, and Cattermole never had one. That tea is worth more to me than it is to you or to anybody who will bid for it at the company's next sale. I will put it to my houses, and if they agree, I will take your warrants at 18,000, payable at the next 2 prompts, and you will lose £4,000 and your temper and nothing else. And if they do not agree, then you get nothing from me and I shall be sorry, and you will still have had a truer valuation this morning than you have had in 11 years. The 45 agreed, by a vote taken by post, with 2 against, and Anne Thirlby's proxy, carrying 11 of the north. The September sale opened on the 6th of October, And before the first lot was put up, Mr. Absalom Grierson stood at the rostrum and read a minute of the Committee of Warehouses. The minute recited that the committee had examined the manner in which the brokers' valuations had been made for the last 11 years, that the upset prices of the company's sales had in consequence been fixed too low, and were now to be fixed from a valuation certified by the broker who made it and published over that broker's own name, and that the valuations of the last 2 years upon which the committee had fixed its upsets, and upon which this room had bid, were the work of Miss Rosamund Frayne, of Mincing Lane. Somebody at the back said, quite audibly, that a woman could not be sworn to the trade. "She has not been sworn to it," said Grierson. "She has been doing it 4 years under her father's name, and 2 since, and every gentleman in this room has bid from her figures every quarter, and not one of you noticed, and I include the committee and myself." And the Duke of Stanmore, standing at the back with his gloves in one hand, said, into a room that had gone entirely quiet, "I have priced my tea by that sheet every Tuesday for 2 years." He came to the north room again in November, on a Thursday, with no business at all in his hands, which he was obliged to admit at the door. In March, he said, I said in that sale room that the trade wanted a head for figures and a tongue for tea, and that you had neither. "You did," said Rosamund Frayne, who was at the table with 11 canisters in front of her, and her sleeves turned back. "And you priced your tea by both of them every Tuesday for 2 years. The sheet went out on the Tuesday before every quarterly sale, as it always had, printed in Bucklersbury, with the number of every lot in the catalogue, and a valuation set against it in a column of shillings and pence. The only alteration was at the head of the column, where the name was, and the whole trade bid from it exactly as it had always done, having no other choice, and knowing at last whose hand it was reading.